The superhumans you admire. The billionaires, the five-star generals, the iconic athletes, they are not born with more willpower than you. They are flawed mortals who simply hacks the system. Tim Ferriss, after interviewing over 200 of these titans for Tools of Titans, discovered the same fundamental truth. They do not possess a genetic advantage in discipline. They just possess better, more effective operating instructions. And they freely admit they stole them from someone else.
It's an irreversible claim, isn't it? It just fundamentally changes how you view success. It completely strips away the myth of the lone, self-made genius. You look at someone like Arnold Schwarzenegger, the ultimate self-made man, yet he says it himself. It is not true that I am self-made. Like everyone, to get to where I am, I stood on the shoulders of giants. This whole deep dive proves that success it's systematizable, it's shareable if you're courageous enough to embrace borrowing.
Exactly. And our mission today is to cut through all the noise. This book is 700-plus pages. It's full of detailed routines, strange supplements, esoteric diets. We're ignoring all that distracting detail to distill the absolute core. The 3 fundamental Titan laws or mindsets that you can immediately run experiments on in your own life. These are the tools that transfer across wealth levels and industries. Welcome to another deep dive from Nonfiction Insights. Let's unpack the difference here between the traditional view of success and this Titan view. We usually believe that Titans are just savants with some innate exceptional talent. They're just better. Ferriss's work completely flips that. They are not better. They are disciplined collectors and testers of tools. They treat their life, their business, even their own biology as an ongoing systematic experiment.
But hang on, here's the skeptic's view. We all read inspirational books. We all know we should find role models and, follow their advice. What is the actual structural difference here between what most people call learning from success and this systematic tool collection? Why isn't this just another recycled batch of self-help tips?
The difference is consistency and mechanical experimentation. This is the gap between knowing and doing. Ferriss hits this point again and again. He says, if more information was the answer, then we'd all be billionaires with perfect abs. The Titans understand that information is basically useless without rigorous, consistent application. They are obsessed with the process over the product. If you don't cultivate quality in the small moments, the seemingly insignificant ones, you're just cultivating sloppiness. They use systematic tools, checklists, written routines, self-assessment grids, because they know memory and motivation are totally unreliable.
So it's the rigor. The rigor of the system sets them apart. They're treating their daily actions like a scientific protocol. Okay, I accept that. So let's get to the laws. If success is a system, where do we start?
That brings us to Law 1. Success starts by hacking your internal state, not your time. Tony Robbins' core lesson is the foundation for so much of this. He calls it state, then story, then strategy. If you wake up and just allow yourself to drift into a low emotional state, tired, anxious, rushed, you are immediately handicapped.
And if you're handicapped by that low state, you're only going to see problems, not solutions. Your negative emotional state, it literally poisons your perception. It warps the whole narrative you tell yourself about your constraints and your opportunities.
Precisely. You shift from a creative state to a reactionary one. And what's fascinating here is how often the sources confirm this. The data shows that 80% of these Titans have some kind of daily mindfulness or physical morning practice. And they're not doing this for spirituality. They're doing it explicitly for biochemistry.
Yeah.
They're actively changing their physiology upon waking to prevent that conversational self-chatter that leads to being lost in thought.
But that sounds like classic correlation, not causation, right? If Peter Thiel, the great contrarian, were here, he would ask, if the most successful people in the world also happen to enjoy yachting, does that mean yachting causes success? How do we know the mindfulness is the cause of their professional triumphs?
And that's the critical pivot we have to make. It's not meditation itself. It's state control, achieved through deliberate, often intense physical intervention before the day attacks with external demands. This is not passive. Think of Tony Robbins' priming routine, a quick cold water plunge, maybe just 30 to 60 seconds, followed by rigorous breathing exercises. It's a physiological shock designed to forcibly override that default negative emotional state.
Wait a minute. So billionaires take cold showers, and that's the big insight. I could take a cold shower this afternoon. This is where I start to see the critique of privileged indulgence. I mean, this only works if you already have the time for a customized cold pool or access to a 220-degree sauna routine like Laird Hamilton. That's a massive time commitment and a huge resource requirement. How is that scalable for the average person trying to get ahead?
That is a fair attack. And we have to separate the tool from the principle. Laird Hamilton's 220-degree sauna is an expensive tool, absolutely. But the lesson is the principle. Calculated heat exposure, or hyperthermic conditioning, is a tool that significantly increases growth hormone and endurance. Athletes like ultrarunner Amelia Boone and cyclist David Zabriskie use these methods, not for luxury, but for measurable performance improvements. The principle is finding a physiological shock that shifts your internal biology dramatically upon waking. A minute in a cold shower is free, and it achieves the same immediate jolt to override your default state. It gives you control over your story and your strategy for the day.
Okay, so the lesson is, the moment you wake up, you must intentionally disrupt your equilibrium to gain control. I like that differentiation. The principle, not the tool.
Now let's move to Law 2. This shifts our focus from internal state control to handling the external world, the world of risk and decision-making. Instead of obsessing over positive, high-flown goal setting, the second Titan law is fear setting. This is the Stoic idea of rigorously defining the worst-case scenario.
Defining the nightmare, it sounds exactly like what you shouldn't do if you're already prone to that destructive, vicious running around in circles thought process. If you're anxious about a major decision, forcing yourself to detail the worst outcomes, that seems like a recipe for immediate paralysis. Won't this just become anxiety fuel?
That's the genius twist. The process itself is the antidote to the paralysis. You don't just dwell on the fear, you force structure onto it. It involves 3 columns. The first, define the nightmare in painful detail. What is the permanent impact on a scale of 1 to 10? But you immediately move to the second column. How easy is it realistically to repair the damage or get things back on track?
Hold on, let me stop you there. Give me a concrete example. The distinction between painful detail and repair.
Okay, let's say you're thinking about quitting your secure job to launch your own business. Column 1 isn't just I'll fail. It's I will lose 6 months of salary, burn through my savings, have to move in with my parents, and face extreme professional embarrassment. That's the pain. Column 2 forces you to address it. How easy is it to repair? Could I teach on the side? Could I freelance for a former colleague for 3 months to rebuild my savings? Could I get my old job back or a similar one a year from now?
That framing makes the risk feel tolerable. You realize the worst outcome is rarely irreversible ruin. It's just temporary embarrassment and a fixable financial hit.
Exactly. And the final and most crucial column is the cost of inaction. Where will you be in 1, 5, or 10 years if you don't act? If you stay frozen by the fear of a manageable setback? Fear setting overwhelmingly reveals that the greatest, most irreversible negative outcome is usually the cost of inaction.
That shifts the focus entirely. From self-pity to momentum, it's radical acceptance followed by problem solving. It aligns perfectly with what Jocko Willink preaches. When things go wrong, a project fails, a plan goes sideways, you just look at the issue and say, good.
And that's the application of Law 2. Jocko isn't some smiley positive guy who ignores reality. He accepts the hard truth of the constraint. The plan failed, the building burned down, and he says, good, because that setback defines the problem. Now we know exactly where the weakness was, and we can rebuild it stronger or adapt the plan immediately. This brings us directly to the third law. And this is all about maintaining that productive focus space we just created. It's the hell yeah or no principle, famously championed by Derek Sivers.
I love the simplicity of this. It's the ultimate filter against the tyranny of just incremental commitment.
Right. If you're not jumping up and saying hell yes to a commitment or opportunity, the default answer is no. This defends against drowning in all those kind of cool professional or social commitments that just slowly bleed your time and energy. The Titans argue this consistently. Being busy is often just lazy thinking. A lack of time is simply a lack of priorities.
But again, this is advice that sounds easy for the top 1%. I still have rent to pay. If I'm starting out and a potential client offers work that's not a hell yeah, I risk my financial stability if I reject it. I don't have the luxury of that protected empty space yet, this principle. It seems only applicable once you've already made it.
Actually, the need for this filter is precisely what holds people back in the early stages. If you spend 80% of your time on incremental, kind of cool opportunities, you have zero energy left to pursue the one thing that could be a true 10x breakthrough. Peter Thiel warns that if you are copying the current successful models, trying to build another slightly better version of what already exists, you aren't learning from the Titans. You are just competing.
So the goal isn't better competition. The goal is creating a monopoly of value. That's what Thiel calls orthogonal thinking, finding the unique path that others aren't even looking at.
Exactly. Saying no is how you create that necessary empty space for that truly big, non-incremental idea to take shape. Naval Ravikant speaks to this. He notes that the more you associate desire with cash value, the more you convince yourself that you're too poor to buy your freedom. Saying no to the small incremental money is the necessary discipline to free up the energy to pursue real freedom.
Okay, so we have Law 1, state control, achieved by deliberate physiological shock. Law 2, fear setting, which reveals the cost of inaction. And Law 3, hell yeah or no, which creates space for exponential growth. So, if I start taking cold showers tomorrow, I magically become a titan.
No. And that's the meta lesson. The key is to borrow the mindsets and run personalized experiments, not to clone the lifestyle. The book has dozens of specific tips, like Rick Rubin's rule of carrying a notebook everywhere or various strange cocktails for sleep. But those are just starting points. The point is not to follow every tip. It's to use the mindsets.
That application piece is what matters. It forces you out of complacency. And if we're talking about running experiments, I think the most shocking insight, the one that should be the engine of these experiments, it's got to be Peter Thiel's guiding question.
So the old question, why can't you accomplish your 10-year plan in 6 months?
That question it's brutal. It completely undermines your fundamental assumptions about speed and constraint. We naturally default to incremental thinking, a 10% improvement, a 1-year target. That question immediately highlights whether you're seeking a 10x improvement or just a tiny 10% incremental change.
Let's run a quick experiment on that. Let's say your 10-year plan is to write a definitive book in your field. If you were forced to do it in 6 months, you would have to rethink every single constraint. You couldn't spend 5 years researching every detail. You'd have to delegate or drastically narrow the topic or choose a co-author immediately. You would be forced to find the absolute highest leverage action.
That's powerful. It cuts through the fog of busyness, which, as we established, is lazy thinking. Mark Andreessen noticed that companies struggle because they're focused on the wrong constraints. Many businesses fail because they are not charging enough for their product. They're focused on volume, not value. The Thiel question forces you to focus on the things that actually matter.
It's why people like Arnold Schwarzenegger, when faced with overwhelming challenges, don't just grit their teeth and push through. They actively use tools to break the big problem down into small, one-at-a-time challenges. He uses his intense workouts as a form of meditation, a disciplined tool to channel that mental energy. It proves that the Titans use systems even when facing chaos.
It's a full ecosystem of tools. The book provides cheat sheets from the world's best performers in every field. From the chess prodigy Josh Waitzkin teaching the macro from the micro by starting his students with complex endgame scenarios, to Richard Branson capping the downside risk when starting Virgin Airlines by negotiating the return of the planes if the venture failed, they all minimize the true cost of failure.
So the synthesis is this. The genius isn't some inherent talent. It is applied synthesis. The courage to borrow the best tools, run personalized daily experiments on your physical and mental state, and prioritize that state control before you approach any major strategy. They succeeded because they learned how to borrow well.
It's about using borrowed instruction sets to gain control over your internal landscape, define the external risks, and protect your energy for only the highest leverage opportunities.
And here's the final provocative thought for you to chew on this week. The fear of failure stops most people, but the real enemy is the cost of inaction. Think about the advice Chris Sacca's father gave him. The interesting jobs are the ones that you make up. If you don't use these Titan tools to define your unique path and take calculated risks, you are implicitly choosing to let circumstance impose itself upon you. And that guarantees a path of incremental disappointment and regret 10 years from now.
Remember, success is not defined by innate talent. It is defined by the quality of the operating instructions you choose to steal and apply consistently.
If you want more deep dives like this that cut straight to the actionable core and expand on the skeptical challenges, make sure you subscribe. And tell us which of these Titan tools, state control, fear setting, or hell yeah or no you are ready to test this week. This has been a deep dive from Nonfiction Insights.